You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG. Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries. It's a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games with two GMs. I'd like to talk about their recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. How about that? And on the show today, we discuss factions. Hey there, Sages and Adventurers. My name is Matt, and with me as always is my good friend and GM colleague, Jody. How you doing today, bud?
I'm feeling a little seedy, a little underhanded, a little dubious, a little sneaky, which is ill-aligned with that very pleasant intro you just did.
Don't bring those vibes here, man. I'm trying a new thing.
Okay, I picked up on it.
You like that?
No, I don't.
Why not? I kind of think it's fun to kind of, it's like a different character kind of.
I'm going to drop into Seinfeld and offend somebody if you keep doing that.
All right, dude. That's you. Today's episode focuses on faction play. So Jody, who is in a mood I just don't agree with, why don't you take us to the table? I couldn't get through it.
Will. So my seedy, underhanded, double dealing mood is coming from the fact that my players just finished walking themselves through, rolling through, slogging through the Oldenhaller contract, which is the introductory adventure first presented in Warhammer Fantasy Role-Playing, the first edition of the game. It was their introductory adventure. Now, my players are 4th, 5th, 3rd to 5th level, somewhere in there, these characters that we're rolling with. So some adjustments needed to be made. But if you're aware of like UK adventure design of the late 80s, they were not bashful about challenges back in those days, so it worked out great. So I'm going to give you probably some pretty heavy spoilers here, but I'm going to take you through the adventure as it is relevant to our topic today. Now, in this adventure, the players are tasked with recovering a gem of dubious origins, some say from the hand of a chaos demon itself. Now, this noble who is hiring them, the eponymous Oldenhaller, wants no association with the gem that he smuggled into town or the team that's about to go recover it, our party of adventurers. So he hires them. Now, he informs our party that the gem was imported by a local gang. However, that gang had the gem stolen by another gang. So the first gang that imported the gem, I called them the Holdsmen, local to a port town. Now, it was stolen by the Iron Hooks, a local Southtown rival gang. Now, what we didn't know is that the Iron Hooks took the gem into their base, and in the interim, a third gang that I'm using to call the Veiled Society swept in and ambushed the Iron Hooks, taking the gem for themselves. The players must now navigate the secret sewer layers of these rival gangs beneath the city of Saltmarsh, and they have until dawn to get the gem or the box that they've got that will contain the power within. That magical box will fade, and then they'll be tainted by the magic gem. Oh, and did I mention that there's also a chaos cult in the gem, in the sewers, and they are unaffiliated with any of the other groups I've mentioned. Oh, and also, there are monstrous denizens in the sewers that are down there that you have to contend with. Did you get all that? Good. Let's go.
Okay. I did not look at these notes before we started. I love this.
You're sick.
This is my kind of thing. Now, okay, so we're going to talk about factions today. We've got no less than 4.5, I'm going to say, factions to contend with here. We've got 3 gangs, 1 chaos cult, and then monsters is going to be, it's like a half a faction.
Yeah, who are essential to the adventure.
Now, okay, factions. Jody, so I'm a huge fan of factions. I have lots of thoughts on them, but I don't even know where to start because you just kind of served up such an interesting panoply, an interesting cornucopia, if you will, of options. But what I want to ask you is, let's not bury the lead. Was this successful? And what I mean by successful is, did the players meaningfully interact with these factions, and in doing so, get a satisfying or a result that was based on their knowledge and use of these factions?
90% yes.
Whoa, that's pretty solid, dude.
Yeah, for the guy who gets done and instantly hates everything about everything he's ever GM'd, that's as high of a score as I can give myself.
I'm not going to let you do it. You have been on this bender lately. We're going to take a little bit of it. This is a deviation. This is a digression.
Different faction, you might say.
No. You've been on this kick of saying that, like, after sessions you had like this existential crisis about that you're not a good GM. And I just want to say that I know you're trying to laugh it off, but we have some fun with it. But I do think that, like, we should at some point dive into that. And maybe if you don't want to, of course, but I do think that, you posted a little poll on the DMD thread on Discord about this and got some interesting results. And I think you've been going on about it a little bit. And I think it would be interesting to talk about on one of our, infrequent, but generally well-received episodes in which we plumb the depths of our sort of consciousness and psychology as GMs. So, on that note, you don't get a say of whether you can say off mic whether or not that's okay, but I'm going to throw it out there and it's going to go out to the general listening public. Let's get back to factions. You said 90% successful. Give me the reasons why you think that was the case.
They interacted with all 4.5 factions in intensely meaningful ways. At the end of the session, they made a choice based on their relationship with said factions that will have, I think, unavoidable consequences that they're very aware of. I asked 2 of the players as they were departing, because we ran a smidge long and I felt extremely guilty about running a little long. I asked 2 of them, I was like, hey, did you feel like you were able to, like, suss out everything that happened? And they were like, no, I felt like I understood how all that fell together, which was a huge, like, intro of that's a lot going on in one little sewer.
Yeah, especially to deliver to players in an interesting way.
They knew at the beginning of the session that they were walking into the Hooks, the Southern Gang's lair, to recover the gem from them, and they already had an alliance in prior sessions with the person they know to be responsible for that Thieves Guild. The Hooks are actually part of the Thieves Guild, and they have an alliance with the person who runs the Thieves Guild.
Now you've melted my brain.
So this is, and I'll give you this. I'm of 2 minds of this adventure, and I want to talk about that in light of that it is a scripted adventure that is this faction heavy. It's bananas that it's an introductory adventure.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I mean, for brand new players to be like, hey, not only do you have to learn the mechanics, and not only do you have to learn about the world in some way, but also here's 4.5 factions for you to contend with. Good luck.
All of which under the guise of you're interacting with a nobleman who wants nothing to do with any of this. Because there's another, I guess we can get all the way to 5. There's another half faction. We'll see how many. Let's play with us, listeners. How many factions were there? The reason this is bananas, now, full credit to the adventure, this is part 2 of the adventure. The introductory adventure has you arrive in town and you have these interactions with people in the streets, and you bump against the gangs a little bit and you learn some stuff that way.
Okay.
So credit to the writers that they do that. I skipped all of that, and the reason I skipped all of that is because I've got about 20 sessions-ish of hours of play in Saltmarsh. So I had looped all of these factions, and I've changed all the names from as they're presented in the Warhammer world, because they would all be German sounding, Schnetzenbolgers and stuff like that, because that's what the name of everything is. And it's real. That's not even kind of, it's like 60% accurate.
I wasn't saying, I'm sorry, I wasn't saying come on to you. I was just saying come on. Maybe there's like British, anyways.
Yeah. So they I ported all that stuff over because it was easy to deliver that last session, because the session that preceded this was they come to town and they are following up on leads, and it's the, all right, guys, get in your notes as you kind of coined it. And it's a great, sometimes we call them crossroad sessions, where it's like, hey, on an ongoing campaign, you're at a point where I don't know where you guys are going next and you need more information. So we'll have a shopping episode, but there's never any shopping for either of us. It's, you're going to go talk to
you're
people.
You're shopping for quest hooks and information. And you're looking for answers to the questions that you have.
What was crazy is the session that before this was 3.5, 4. We ended a little bit early and it was a little bit slow roller, but like a good full 3 hours of just in character talking to NPCs and going around town and gathering information. And there were 2 different quests.
So you kind of did the thing that this introductory adventure did.
I did. It just was set up entirely different, unique to my campaign. And that's where I go, this is bananas, because so much of the driving force of factions, and again, let's put the good things up front. If the players don't care about the factions, they won't care about the factions. Like, nah.
Yeah.
So both of these factions were first introduced to them at locations that they know are important and valuable contacts. One of them at the south side of town is run by a halfling who has a giant kind of warehouse. I call it like it's the fantasy Target.
Whenever anyone says warehouse in a fantasy setting, I always think of like a house that turns into a...
And that's why you run Dolmenwood.
Like I always think
it's a house mimic.
It's a house mimic, but it turns into like a furry monster.
Listeners, if any of you are artistic and feel like you got some free time,
yes, the warehouse. I need a warehouse.
WERE house.
Anyways, I'm sorry.
No, that's great. Winston runs a not WERE house. It's a house, and they know from some other contacts that it's a front. It's a really good shop, and you get fair prices on good deals, which is like characters catch phrase. It's like fair prices, great deals, good stuff. It's always something about fair prices and good stuff. And so they didn't want to burn bridges with him because they know he's a good resource for information. And at the north end of town, there's a guy who's like a job provider and like and then there's the Empty Net is a cool bar where there's like you can get into bar, like you can actively get into bar fights. It's like the attraction is the net outside, and that's where the pirates hang out. And you want jobs with pirates and know what's going on at sea, that's where you go. And those are the 2 hubs of these factions now in my setting, and that's like the Northsiders and the Southsiders, and they hate each other. And so like they already cared about those NPCs. So now these underground factions were really meaningful to them because they don't want to get in bad with either of those and lose that contact that sent them on quests, that's given them information. So the factions mattered because the players care about those NPCs. And I don't know if you were starting session 1, you walk into town, it would, to me, and the way I think, it would have to be really contrived.
Yeah. So let's talk about this because the long running Dolmenwood game that is at the time of recording coming to an end in less than a week.
Bananas.
I was actually thinking about this, that factions are a huge part of that game. They have created a sort of quilt, if you will, that has been it's sort of the underpinning of everything we're doing right now in the campaign. These last sessions, this last quest is all about you and sort of the world aligning itself with various factions, some factions taking a backseat, some factions kind of taking a front seat. And I was thinking back to the beginning of the campaign when I introduced the setting. And I remember thinking, man, how the heck are we going to like actually utilize and interact with all these factions? Because the campaign book and the setting book makes it very clear up front. It puts the factions front and center. They are right after the history and secrets of the world are the factions at play. And so this sandbox campaign that I was running, was going to be heavily guided by your interaction with factions. And I think we've talked about this on the show at some point, that at first those factions were kind of pushing from the fringes. Once there were characters that cared about certain factions. Like we had a priest who cared about and was intertwined with the church, which is a faction in the world. When we had a character who was intertwined with the kind of like dark woods, arcane hooded people called the Droon. Like once we had characters that were connected to those factions, that's when the Dolmenwood campaign really came alive in the sense that you guys started to understand how those factions were positioned in opposition or in alliance or in sort of détente with one another. And what I wanted to ask you was, you kind of came about it a little bit differently, at least in my, like, certainly as characters, you guys bounced off factions and stuff like that and had some of these similar things. But in reality, like, the factions of Dolmenwood were introduced because the players chose to play characters that were attached to a faction, and then things kind of spread out from there. Whereas here, you're introducing new factions that were previously unknown, that the character, no one with a Thieves Guild background was aware. I don't know if anyone has had a Thieves Guild background. It doesn't sound like they have.
They have not.
And so there was no reason for these factions to necessarily exist, but through emergent play and through sort of this kind of building of this world, they have come about. So what I wanted to ask you was, is there, like, these seem like two reasonable ways to introduce factions, but I don't want to ask you like which one is better but I kind of want to hear your thoughts on the ideal way to, if you were starting a game, introduce factions, whereas like you did it like kind of like quote unquote mid campaign. Like there's some differences there. Do you have thoughts on that? Like this is an introductory adventure, and so I don't really have a question. It seems like introducing factions at different parts of the campaign is interesting. I don't know. That I'm just going to stop talking and let you pick up from here.
I will do so. Factions are entirely optional.
I disagree.
Okay. I think factions are entirely optional, especially at the beginning. You don't need somebody to align yourself with. You don't know. And if you go in a mega dungeon, it is entirely possible that the mega dungeon is just more random monsters in a hole in the ground that goes down forever, get loot, get out. Is that a style of play you and I generally enjoy? No. If we're going to keep coming back with persistent characters, we like the world to feel alive and lived in. And if you want the world to feel alive and lived in and functioning, people align themselves with ideologies and factions and powers, and what a faction could be exactly like Dolmenwood does, of like, it's a church, it's a religious organization, it's a secret sect, it is, in my case, organized crime, or the faction that everybody's aware of in Saltmarsh. I took the 5e book, has this really cool political aspect to the town.
Yeah, that is really cool.
Traditionalists and then loyalists, and the town went through some hard times, and there are folks who want to go back to kind of, they're this free-wielding merchant town, and that's like traditional values is like, hey, we're a merchant, like, shipping town, just leave us alone, we're kind of isolated on the coast. It's actually a reasonable want for them, but they were bailed out by the king and the king's navy and saved from this like oppressor, and now the king has a presence in their town with like a royal guard that defends them, and those are like loyalists. Their folks are like, hey, we benefit by being a part of this greater network. And it, at times feels very real worldy. So I did also tie this into that familiarity a little bit, that like all of these gangs are all traditionalists. There's no loyalist gang, because why would there be? This is all people who believe in smuggling, and like, yay, smuggling is good. So this is like the infighting, creating layers and layers of complexity. This module is written as an introductory adventure. So you could run it just because, hey, you need coin, go into the sewers, do the job, get me the coin, get the gem, and not have any stake. And you still would have factions that are important, because unraveling the mystery of the adventure is dependent on understanding the conflict between these opposing groups. So which one's better? Starting with factions to me is always dubious, and you want to keep them really generic.
I think like 2 or 3, right? Like
2 or 3, and they need to have like really simplistic caricature faces. if they are deeply tied to the world's, your players are going to bounce off that because it's just too big to mentally grapple with.
Here's where I come back to my favorite advice that not everyone agrees with, but my favorite advice from Quinn's when he was still a part of Shut Up and Sit Down and did this, like how to get started in TTRPGs, which is a great video.
It is.
We'll post a link to it. It's wonderful, but he has this thing that I continue to come back to, that is you should play NPCs like they are wrestlers, like they're like those kind of like
WWE pro,
right.
Yeah.
And those guys are always like they are in a lot of ways like one-dimensional characters, especially when they start. They have like a finishing move and like a vibe,
an outfit.
Right. And they're either, the heroes or the heels kind of a thing, right? And is that correct?
Baby face, man. They're called baby faces.
Damn it. I'm going to leave this in. I'm going to leave this whole thing in.
Great.
Just so that people know that
I'm
an honest guy and I'm a nerd and I don't watch wrestling.
So say more about baby faces.
All right. I'm going to, you know what? Fine. So we got in wrestling, we have baby faces and heels. And what I think about factions, I think that it's very useful to have an NPC that is the singular representative of a faction, and to make that person a one-dimensional NPC. To make them, like in Dolmenwood, if it's the faction of the church, you have somebody who immediately says, hey, if you see any witches, go find them because we want to burn them. And if you see any people with hoods on who are like skulking around in the forest, let us know because we also want them dead as well. And that immediately says like, okay, I think we know what these guys are about. Oh, and if you find any shrines, let us know. Okay, well, great. That might be one thing too many, but like you need very clear directives. And I think for pre-existing settings like Dolmenwood that are very, in the case of Dolmenwood, extremely layered, it is very useful to choose a couple of factions that are in opposition, introduce those early, and then let the other factions kind of come in. At least that was my sort of experience. But what I think is interesting about what you've done is you started that way with these two factions, but you have, in an emergent way, developed new ones. Like these weren't already existing factions in your lore. And this is where I want to get to one of my big beefs with fantasy, which is the delivery of lore. And I wanted to ask you, how did you deliver the lore around these thieves guilds or these factions that are associated in one way or another with thieves guilds, etc.? How did you deliver the lore? Because to me, it's one thing to know the factions exist. It's one thing to know kind of where they're at, broadly speaking, but there's some complex interactivity happening here and probably some stuff that you didn't really get to in the intro.
Absolutely. Well, the intro, again, was a whole separate session, much like, again, the adventure is written with, like, you come into town and, like, somebody tries to rob you and other things happen. So for me, they came to town before this session with the split purpose of there's a magic weapon they're aware of that has a lineage to other adventures that I've tied them into. At some point, it might loop us all the way back to White Plume Mountain, which would be dope. That was one of the weapons from White Plume Mountain was the loop.
Oh,
so it's that.
Oh, I can't remember what they're called, but yep. I wish I could.
If any of them are listening, they are like, wait, what? And don't go look it up, you guys. So they came in looking for that, but there'd also been an assassination attempt in a separate adventure that we were on for an NPC that they've heavily aligned another group of characters from their stable with. And they were coming back to Saltmarsh because I just told them, like, the assassin came from Saltmarsh. There's markers here that say these people came from Saltmarsh. That's where the assassination was sent from. So they came back and they are like, how are we going to find out about assassins? And somebody said, actually, we are collective players, because I let them have that meta knowledge of the collective characters know things. We have a sense of, we know where the thieves guilds punched into. We also know on the other end of town, there's the seedy bar that's the biker bar, right? It's the tough bar. So, like, let's split up and we'll go to the two bars. So the delivery of information began there. And I knew I already had this adventure queued up that, like, I can head them this direction, because that's how it goes, is whatever game session I'm playing, I'm dropping hints about other next session, 2 or 3 sessions ahead. So I'm always, the usual, you plan 1 or 2 sessions out, at least I do, of like, what are modules I might want to grab so I can drop clues. So as they went to talk to these two different people in town, I went, oh, well, that would work well for representing different factions that are necessary for this module. So it was literally just as they were making inquiry, I started, one of the clues I dropped early on was like the guys who were in the assassination attempt were wearing hooks on their lapels. They had big fish hooks. That's how you were like, well, that must send us back to the coast town. That's why these great big fish hooks. So they started asking around about that. Turns out when they were on the north side of town, those guys were like, oh, the hooks, and started immediately talking trash. And then the players were smart enough in the moment to go like, oh, yes, we also hate those guys. Tell us more about those guys you hate. And then slowly as they were sitting there, I kind of made it fun of like, they start realizing there's all this iconography around the bar and that like the net itself is actually like a big gang symbol for them. And it just kind of grew from that. So it was a matter of delivering the lore became necessary for them to complete the quest.
But you contextualized it in the world.
Yep.
And so because one of the pitfalls of factions is that, especially when folks build their own worlds, this is something I have done, is you want your players to know about the world. You want your players to know about the factions of your world and use that information to interact with the world and to interact with the factions. All that is fairly self-evident. What I have found, though, is that unless it is, and I usually don't really like this term, but unless it is gameable, meaning that like it's applicable, it's not. For me, I have learned, there is a very short timer on when most players are willing to sit through lore for lore's sake, just world building and the tapestry of the world, until you get to, this is applicable and something that I can actively use in the game world to affect the game world. For me, I have really tried to close the gap, or I guess shift the ratio is what I should say, from what I enjoy doing, which, as we've established, is mostly just talking in funny voices and kind of, going back and forth with players, to delivering information extemporaneously in character, as I like to do at our kind of in our Dolmawood game and when we are playing a more narrative-focused game. I have really tried to shift the focus because it's very easy to get lost in the sauce of the world, especially when you built it. And so I see a lot of GMs, you hear this question a lot, how do I get players to care about my world? And many people who are talking heads on YouTube and Matt Colville et al. Have made videos about how to get players to care about your world. And for me, the way that I get players to care about the world is, as soon as possible, I introduce factions and I introduce ways for players to meaningfully engage with those factions, and I make it very clear that gaining favor with one faction will have effects for others, but that those levers of power and the power dynamics of the world are there for the players to mess with. That like they are gameable content. That like you as players, I am perhaps sometimes very explicitly, I will just say, you need to choose a side.
Right.
Like, and when players don't want to choose a side, for me, that is a sign that both sides are going to come to them very soon and demand that they choose a side.
Right. Or give them something that will put them in direct opposition.
Exactly.
Right. Like one of the factions shows up and says, I want you to go screw over the other faction.
Right.
And then if you say, and that's exactly what my characters found themselves in. If once they were in the room with the noble hiring them, they were rightly, and I believe one of the players said, like, we can't back out now, you guys. Like, we're in the room with the guy. He's seen our faces.
Yep.
We agreed to the job already. Oh no, this puts us in opposition with the shopkeeper who is the head of the Thieves Guild. What do we do? Well, we get down there and we figure it out on the fly. And now to dive into the adventure, to emphasize the point you're making. So they get to the first faction, the Hooks at the south end of town, who they know have stolen the gem and are representative of this NPC they most wish to maintain their alliance with. And they get in there and it turns out the place is ransacked, which immediately alleviates some of the stress of like, okay, the guys we wanted to stay in good with and we didn't want to come down here and kill them and lose that ally, they're already dead. That's now a new problem. And they start looking around because they're there to find this gem. And they're like, well, let's look around, find the gem, find the guy that because they got a name drop to like go look for this guy. And they find him and he's like almost everybody else. He's dead. And this is where I added in a note, an in-world diegetic handout. So here is a note that is a brief outline of his plan, very hastily scrawled, that was a very rough map of not the sewers. I didn't give them a map of the sewers. I gave them a map of the regions under town. That like, this is our turf, that's their turf, and here's what's in between, and a rough place. And it had like, and it's a clue drop that's in the module. Here's the password for the rival gang right now, so you can get in there. And then there was a note where he was saying how he was operating independently and like is trying to buy his girl Sally out of servitude somewhere, and kind of fun in-world stuff. But that was in-world lore drop, right? That's really specific to that moment. And it was telling them how the factions were interacting and giving them the clue to go to the next thing, go to the next thing. And in the adventure, as you're sorting through the dead bodies, you get into a room and there's a guy that is at the last of his life. And as you come in, he's just out of reflex snaps a shot off at you. And the players can either lunge at him and kill him. And I kept it. I feel like I didn't telegraph squat. It was like, no, dude leans back and unlocks a crossbow bolt at your priest. And she ran over and we'd been randomly rolling because she's their elf priest is the one Bonnie has this relationship with in game with like this gang. She's like been selling them weird stuff and animal parts that she finds and goes and sells it to this shopkeeper, and he buys her weird samples grudgingly because he has a buyer for them. And she kept rolling and going, and I was using the 50-50 die. Do I know any of the people in this room? And I said, give me, and it was no. Weird enough until she got to this room. And I was like, well, that's too cool that the die just came out. Yes. And there's this dude. And so he snaps a shot at her, and everybody, for whatever reason, all the players let her react. And Bonnie goes, wait, and runs over and heals the guy and casts healing on him. And he lore drops, and they get an XP point because they just discovered a secret. This dude not being dead provides you secrets. But again, that was a mechanism for going, here's the factions, here's the lore, here's what's to do next. Warned them like, hey, don't go just wandering around in the sewers trying to get to places. It's a maze. You'll get lost. Just take the North Passage, and that'll get you to the society. And then I dropped in. He goes, and they were like, well, how do we get into the society? And he said, well, if you know their password, which I knew they did, I was like, they contract out a ton because they don't like their internal membership is so limited and secretive that you'd never know if somebody's working for them or not. So they'll take you at your word if you show up and you know the right things to say. And so the party then had this really intense role-playing adventure, which is in the script of like in this second hub base of like they're walking around while stuff's just crime be a happening around them, and they're reacting. And that's where you get the lore about now there's cultists in the next room, and these guys have gotten wiped out in the next fort. And so as you're interacting with them and talking to them, I did one of my graduated skill checks where like everybody makes a charisma check, and the more successes from the table, I have scripted graduated lore bits. And if nobody passes, then you just don't get any more lore. But if you get all of them, the last one is like super world reveal-y stuff, and somewhere in between, they're kind of graduated in terms of actionable. You assume somebody's going to pass. So you get the like, hey, you need to know this about the next faction. That's item one. Okay. And then a little more nuanced from there. And so that was a lot of it was just talk to NPCs and like knowing in advance, what are the clues each NPC will give you? What are the clues I can slide around the dungeon to make sure, like, if we just start flailing around, at one point they found a secret door. They got an XP point. They found a secret door, and they were like, oh, well, we see where this goes. And the ranger did some tracking. And I was afraid they were going to just take off like entirely off the map, and they could have, but they followed the clues in a different direction. I was like, in the back of my brain, I'm like, oh no, well, I have some mechanics for how a sewer works. Here we go. But they opted not to. So that was really, it was making the mystery of Faction 1 brought in the gem. They got ambushed by this guy. He was kind of working independently. They got wiped out as retribution. And the story I came up with was the middle gang. The guy who stole the gem tried to pin it on the middle gang so it would hide his action. Yep. And then like once they figured that out, they knew like, well, if we go to the second gang, they came in and wiped them out. And there was like guys are wearing, their colors, if you will. And they're seeing some bodies along the way. So it was about, like a mystery adventure. You're like, I got to keep giving you clues, keep giving clues, which is a thing is the wisdom of the internet. I often talk a lot of trash about the wisdom of the internet. And here I am but it's like, no, if you're running a mystery, just keep dumping clues. Like everything has to be, as you were saying, gameable, actionable information. So that was like really that first area was like, I'm going to try as many different ways as I can there are things the players can interact with that goes, here's everything that happened.
So you have tried to do two very difficult things here, which is run a mystery with clues and introduce no less than 4, perhaps 5 factions. Which to me is like, I mean, that's like running the game on hard mode because inevitably, well, and I'll say this, you have very attentive and thoughtful and engaged players, which, many tables do. But still, even with very attentive and engaged players are going to miss a lot of what you say. Each individual player, misses a good chunk of what the GM says just because you do. And, or, you miss the emphasis or you miss mishear a name or whatever. And we've had players in my game that have been operating off of incorrect information for like multiple sessions, and then they'll realize, oh, I just wrote this wrong in my notes and locked it into my brain. And everyone around the table goes, no, that's not how that works. And it's like, oh, that explains a lot.
I see now how we got here.
So I want to keep this focused on factions, but I also want to kind of say that like you synthesized 2 very difficult things to do in role-playing games, which is leverage factions in a meaningful way and to do a mystery, and you did it in 1 session, which is very impressive. I mean, like, I guess 2 sessions, right? Because you had your kind of setup session.
Yeah, session 1 here was we walk in the front door, but I'll be honest, we got through nearly 20 rooms with a big, crazy combat at the end that was rad. I was very stoked. And we played, I mean, we really used our full time and I ran long. So it was like a 4.5 hours of actual play time, but it was jamming. Like when I got done, I was like, I think I'm good for a minute. My brain was cooked, but it was rad. Thank you. I was very chuffed with what they got through.
I just think like you have said in the past that you wanted to work on pacing. I know that's not the topic of this episode, but I do think that like there's some stuff to tease out here that I actually think factions help with pacing because they're a shorthand. Like the reason that I think factions are, if not necessary, they are potentially, I don't know that I can say they're not necessary. I think they're necessary, and I think they're necessary because they give players the ability to make assumptions about the world in ways that move the game along. This is why in our last episode, I was talking about pacing a little bit, because one of the challenges in an emergent narrative world where nothing is defined is there are no factions. And so no one can kind of guess about how to interact with an NPC or guess how something is going to react to them. And when you define those factions in a meaningful way, players have expectations they can act on and information they can act on, and that makes the session move quicker. And I think that this is not a panacea. It's not going to solve every problem, right? Like
just add factions and everything will be great, folks.
Right.
No.
But I do think that like it is a solution to pacing problems in a situation where let me back up a second. I think that the challenge is when you're introducing new modules, right? And you're introducing new content consistently, that sometimes those factions can get a little muddied in a way that if you're subverting players' expectations in too many ways, those things can get muddied. And one of the things that I thrive in as a player is consistency and the ability to leverage. What I would say is just like my knowledge of the world, but what I probably really mean is being able to leverage factions. I think that you've had this experience where, like, as a player, I will almost always go back to how can I leverage the various political elements in the world to get information, to make things more in our favor, to kind of leverage those things for our benefit. And I do that partially because that's what I want players to do in the games that I run and the way that I GM, but also because I study history and politics. And so, of course, I'm going to see it through this lens, but I think that in role-playing games, you don't have to have a sophisticated understanding of politics. You don't have, like, your factions can be very one-dimensional, and your players will overthink them, and they will add 14 dimensions to your factions that you did not expect. And if you start with a 14-dimensional faction that is extremely layered and has all these, like, conflicting, politics inside of the faction, it's like, it's too much. And the times that I have gotten in trouble with factions, it's been because of that. The faction has been muddied by its own internal nonsense. And I didn't do a good job of contextualizing it, and the players maybe didn't have touchstones. So
I think that's really valuable, and I'm going to agree with part of it and totally disagree with another part of it. So
okay,
the part
I'd like to hear the part where you agree. And
okay.
Then, look at the time.
Okay. Well, the part I totally agree with is factions are wonderfully useful for giving the party direction. Yes. And what I mean by the party, I really mean more than the party. The players get direction. They say, we like those guys. We're going to do whatever those guys are doing. So we're going to go with them. So factions are undeniably a useful tool. The session of the Olden Holler contract was so much better because they cared about the faction they were initially in opposition with and finding a way to clear their name of that. And once that was done, it was like, okay, that's taken care of. Now we got to go find this gem because there's this chaos gem like rattling around down here. And it's like, the good old ring clattering towards the drain situation of like, we need to grab it before it lands. It's going to land somewhere. Get it. And that was rad that they took that on of just being the heroes, which was super dope. Love that. And I got to introduce new hooks. So in all of those ways, factions are wonderfully useful. The part I'm going to back way up and not let you run out of time on me and disagree with is when you were saying that the treat them... You son
I did
it again. Who railroads now, man?
Very funny.
Hey, thank you. Is the Quinn's advice of running NPCs like pro wrestlers. And I agree with that. Like having a real clear, this is the crusty old guy coming out from the outhouse, and you say, I gotta sober up, but I'll take your message to the next town. If you watch Glass Cannon, that was great. So that kind of thing is great that because it's immediately the players can start interacting and engaging with it, and you're being the biggest doofus at the table, which also gives everybody else the right to live in that theater kid energy a little bit. I don't know that I agree with that for factions, though. I think for me, and this is a great just Matt and Jody GM some stuff different, is I like to keep my factions, they have clear agendas, but they're wildly gray. So if you go back to the loyalist traditionalist, I'm really careful to be like, the loyalists have allegiance to the king and are doing what they're told and are in favor of like, we should pay a lot of taxes and you should rule on a thumb of law and like order. And like, there are parts of that aren't so cool for adventurers. Whereas the traditionalists are like, yay smuggling and yay free trade and let us govern ourselves. Those seem like good things. Also we're pretty okay with an element of like crime and gnarly stuff goes on in our town as a result. There's a lot of gray there, but that's it. That's the whole, like that description is the whole faction, which the reason I think there's a benefit there as opposed to like a faction having a very clear to go to Dolmenwood. The church is bad. In our version of Dolmenwood, we as players immediately went, church is bad.
Yes.
If the church were gray, things might have been different, but we went, church is bad. And my caution is this, that it's probably unfair because gray is also a problem and they have the same outcome problem.
I have lots to say. Continue, but this is very interesting.
The obvious touchstone, and I am not mocking the whole thing. I am saying this is the common critique of campaign 3 for Critical Role.
Okay.
Was there were factions and the players refused to engage with the factions for 4 bajillion hours.
Yeah.
And at the end, I remember I was really dedicated watching at the beginning of the last, not current, but the last Critical Role campaign. And I was like I was into it. And I was like, I want to watch this one all the way through. And I just got tired of it. And then I tuned in at the end again. And I was like, they're literally having the exact same debate they were. And I've missed 50 sessions. And they're literally having the same debate about factions that they were then.
Right.
And allowing, if they're gray and then the players say, oh, I like this, and do exactly what you said of like, and now we've added 14 layers and this is what this means. And this is, then you go, yes, that's the yes. And you play into that. And now they care because they've set the terms. Whereas if you'd start off strong, for me, if I start off strong, what I've seen is like the players codify and calcify the truth of the world that I'm now like handcuffed to that and I can't play with those anymore. So that's just that. And again, neither is right or wrong. It's stylistically how I approach it.
I think you're actually correct here. But the reason, so let me kind of maybe soften my position because I think you're ultimately probably correct. What I mean or meant to say perhaps is that that presenting factions as gray, I understand your point. What I see as a benefit to that is exactly what you said, that you have way more options to create for players to fuss around with, and they can attach themselves to certain people in the faction. I think my problem with Dolmenwood, to go back to that, and the church, I presented the church in a way for a couple of reasons. Number one, because I know my players, and no one at the table is I'm not going to be able to convince anyone at the table that a sort of Roman Catholic Church analog is a good faction, right? Like that's just
it would be a hard sell,
right? And I, as a player, would actually be really interested in playing in a world that had something like that because I like real world politics in my fantasy settings. Almost no one I play with does. So I tend to steer clear of that. And so that was honestly wise because there's this faction that has a glaring sort of blight on it, which is that none of the players around the table are likely to interact positively. And if I try to characterize it and make them sympathetic to it, I actually think that would have caused more harm than good, especially early in the campaign. So, heard there. I think the reason that it works in Saltmarsh is because there are only 2 major factions to start. Yeah. And those 2 factions can be presented as gray because really there are like, and I'm going to oversimplify it, there are 4 factions. And there's 2 major factions and then 2 factions within those factions. There's the people who like are hardcore loyalists, and then there's the people who are maybe less hardcore loyalists. And then you have the hardcore traditionalists and the less hardcore traditionalists. And so to me, I think that actually works better than having a lot of factions from the beginning, is having gray factions, but maybe disaggregating them into their own factional elements. So you have these 2 umbrellas, and then you have these 2 kind of subsidiaries. And the reason that I liked that when you presented it in Saltmarsh is because it felt real. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, and frankly, like I don't really want to get into real world politics, but like I just ran that through my real world politics analogs and was like, oh, I know exactly what's going on here, right? And I liked that. But I think if you had those 2 factions and also 6 other ones.
Here's 3 different street gangs.
Well, like Dolmenwood has the Droon, the Witches, the Church, You've got the 7 noble brewing houses in Prigwort. You've got the human nobility and all the various kind of noble families. I mean, just those. I'm not kidding you. There's like 20 different pieces of the puzzle.
Right. And I think to your point, if you as a GM start with here's 20 different people. Yeah, nope.
Too many.
Don't do that. I remember from our start in Dolmenwood, it was the Council of Brewers. Okay, there's a Council of Brewers,
right,
and there's these 6 people. It's been a long time since we interacted with them, but there's these 6 council
Jody, there
people.
are 7 noble brewing houses, and each of them has their...
Yeah, but we're one of them now, baby. So there are 6 other, kind of. Anyway, there's 7 noble brewing houses.
Thank you.
You got it. I'm sorry. Thank you for actuallying me. And that was our point of contact, though. That was our like, oh, okay, this is the faction we can see. This is the faction we can touch. And then we moved on from there. And it was all one thing. And I think that's also, I've never thought about it this way, but it's kind of a, what's the Russian doll of a thing within a thing within
It's a Russian nesting doll.
Yeah. Okay, so you have in Dolmenwood, there's the town of Prigwort. The town of Prigwort is the biggest doll. Take that one off. Inside of that is the noble brewing houses. Open that up, and there's a series of noble brewing houses inside of those. But you don't start with the entire geopolitical system of Prigwort. Nobody cares.
No.
And that's what I think goes wrong when people start poking with factions, is they start with the geopolitical implications of, nope, stop. That's not what we're doing here. The head of the guards is loyal to the king. This guy who is dealing in illicit goods and wants you to take a job right now does not like the king. We're all done now. That's it. That's all you need to know. And I think there's a lot of things of people want faction play, and then as a GM, I want that. And that's why I say they're optional. Unless the scenario, which is why the Olden Holler contract became a fun thing to talk about, of like, no, you don't get an option of understanding that there are factions down here. If you go down here guns blazing, swords swinging, arrows flying, it's gonna go real bad really fast. You're outnumbered, you're in turf you don't know. There are legitimately some critters down there that'll just eat your face. And also when you get to the end, there's a chaos cult, by the way, which was super fun to run. There's also, just a quick shout out. This is very tangential on another tangent. There's a minecart ride. You get to go on a minecart ride, which was super fun. Like you get in a little minecart and go
like Donkey Kong.
Yeah, like the Indiana Jones ride back in the day. Like,
okay.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry. But like you have, it's an adventure.
Is that a skill challenge?
It was a one and done skill challenge.
Story for another episode.
Preceded by the thing I did fumble, a 6-card chase through the sewers with rat swarms chasing them, like running across rooftops. But to get to the cart, there are rat swarms down the
Man, this is all in one session?
This is all in one session. Got through some stuff. I will post.
We got to do this should have been I got my like banger session. This should have been yours.
It was pretty good. I because I just ran it yesterday. I am curious, actually, maybe when this comes out, players who listen at me and let me know if my read is right. But yeah, it felt like a really, really good session. It was a fun one.
Well, I'm glad it was a great session, Jody, but we have to stop there because we got to hear from a sponsor and then wrap up this episode. I don't want to run long. That was a jerk move. I shouldn't have done that. I'm sorry. Let's hear from a sponsor and come back and close out the show. Dungeon Master Diaries is brought to you by the folks over at Me Dungeons. I mean, at this point, do you need any... Come on, people, get yourself a pair of the underwear that crawls through cracks, not up yours. You know this. I'm tired of shouting into the microphone about Me Dungeons. After all these episodes, if you don't have a pair of their underwear on while you get chased by rabid ghouls through the halls of the Barrow Maze or running from a crookhorn on the eaves of the Dolmenwood, what are you doing? You're probably getting chafed. It's red down there, man. And you're gonna put some lotion or some bag balm. Do you know what bag balm is, Jody?
I do indeed.
The little green tin can.
I'm a big fan.
Do you ever have that as a kid? Do they still have that? Does that still exist?
I don't know. Well, they don't need it Because you got me Dungies.
That's right. I haven't seen a tin of bag balm in years because I've been wearing me Dungies. Now, don't be that guy who forces the party to turn back just before the good treasure because your nethers are redder than a troll's arse. If you're ready to take your adventuring underwear to the next level, use the code Dungeon Master Diaries at checkout and get yourself a pair of me Dungies. You can get yourself a limited edition pair for absolutely free, my friends. Don't get caught with your pants down unless you're wearing me Dungies. All right, Jody, let us bring this topic into the light with some core takeaways. You go first, my friend.
I will do that. GMs, if you want to include factions, figure out first and foremost, what does the faction look like on the ground for the characters at a very low level? You are a level 1 mud farmer just arrived in town seeking fame and fortune. What does the Council of Elder Fruitberries have to, what do they look like for you, the mud farmer?
My first takeaway is that factions are necessary, but really in an ongoing campaign. I really truly believe this, that defining specific factions in your game world is a necessity for an ongoing campaign. They add the layers and complexity to the world, and they create gameable content for your players. They create actionable content for your players, and they force your players to make hard decisions.
For the ongoing narrative campaign, I actually totally agree with that. My last takeaway that I think is usable and useful is start with your factions. Once you determine what they look like on the ground, make them a resource to your characters and your players and their characters. Give. This is free information. Here is easy access to stuff. Here's quick access to quests. Then they start coming back. The first hit's free.
I love that. All right, this last one it needs a little bit of a wind up, but I'm just going to say that if you need inspiration, if you aren't you don't feel comfortable creating factions or introducing what might be considered politics into your game, right? This idea of power and who has power, who's clamoring for power, the struggle over power, which is honestly what factions offer, is they offer politics. And one of the things that I think is unavoidable is that factions and politics require you to have some amount of understanding of what's going on in your game world. And one way to do that is to look at the news. As depressing and dismal as it can often be, what it can do for you is it can give you ideas for how to leverage politics in your game. You read something, you iterate on it, and you remove some of the rough edges of the real world, and you use that as a seed for something in your game world that everyone around the table is going to engage with in a positive way. And only you as a GM will know what that looks like, but I have done this, and if you file off the rough edges, your players won't know that you're using some real world situation as inspiration for a faction.
As the torchlight grows dim, we hope you're able to find something useful in this episode that you can take into a future game, like, a faction. If you have any questions or unique experiences from your table that you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, you can email us at dmdiariespod@gmail.com. You can also reach out via YouTube or on Facebook. Best of all, though, get us at the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadowdark Discord channel. You can find links to those feeds and any other materials we referenced in this episode's show notes. Until next time, may your factions be light and your factions be dark.
Nice. I'm going to try out some characters here at the end. Here's one.
Hey, Dungeon Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It's produced by... Do you like this guy, Jody?
I don't.
Okay. What about this guy?
It's produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner.
There we go.
Our international music is composed by Christian Schuster.
I love that
guy. Dungeon Master Diaries is in production, not affiliated with Library LLC. Charge your computer, Dungeon Library 2023.
That part seemed important.
Absolute nonsense.
We ended with pro wrestlers.
Yep, that's what I was going for.
I got there.